with the chairs and data committee members. And we're doing that in person at the courthouse with the facilitator. And the idea there is for representatives from all the committees to come together with a real data focus and to work with the data group members to make sure recommendations are aligned, and to also have a productive discussion about indicators, which would allow us to track progress related to the recommendations. It is really important that people be there in person for that. We're going to do it downstairs, very spread out fashion in the jury assembly room. If a chair or your data committee representative is not available to do that, we're going to ask that you designate 2 representatives. We want to make sure we have 2 from each committee. That's just a very important event. That's going to be Wednesday, October 14th. And after that event, we'll be coming upstairs, doing lunch with Mayor Cooper and sort of sharing some recommendations with him. And then we'll be moving quite quickly into putting together some proposals for our police chief finalist candidates to reply to in writing before they come to town at the end of the month. So those are a couple of key things. At some point, Melissa, Sharon, it'd be great to make sure we know from you who will be attending that half-day session from your committee. Those are my announcements. Mayor Dean, do you want to step in and make some comments about our lunch and sort of the focus that you want the committees to bring to this next stage of their work? Mayor Dean, you are muted.
I wanted to let this committee know that you've done a really great job. Melissa and Sharon were at the last meeting with the co-chairs. I don't know if you saw in the paper that Dwight Lewis is taking the place of Judge Dinkins. Judge Dinkins is still recovering from an illness. And Dwight, who is, if you don't know him, but I think everybody in Nashville does, a longtime reporter and columnist for the Tennessean, passionate person about civil rights and issues affecting this community. And he'll be a great co-chair, I think. But you all have been working really hard. You've been tremendously organized. And I just wanted to make sure you all understood that, we're now into October. And the mayor has actually appointed another group of 5 people who are reviewing all the 20+ applicants they've gotten for chief. And they're going to get that down to a manageable number and then begin interviews and a process of selection. And so it's key that we meet the deadline of Friday, October 9th in terms of our recommendations. There will be an opportunity later if there are things that we miss or we want to go into in a little bit more detail. But we need to have a product available by the middle of this month so that we're able to help mold the questions that are going to be asked of the potential chiefs and to let them know what the community of Nashville is expecting from its next police chief. So I'm just here briefly to say thank you for all your hard work, to encourage you to, we're now in October, get this done by the 9th. And then on the 14th, we'll have the meeting with the committee chairs and others to present a product to the mayor. But again, best of luck, and let us know how we can be of help. Thanks.
John, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I do not. Thank you for letting us speak. We are happy to turn this over to you.
Well, and I wanted to say, you all are aware now of the deadlines that we've got looming before us. So tonight, we're going to hear from Ellen Abbott, who's the Director of Criminal Justice Services with the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. She's going to be speaking on CIT, which is the Crisis Intervention Team. And then Amanda Brock and her team are going to speak as well. And I guess, Sharon, unless you have something else, let's go right into our discussion.
No, not at all. Let's go because we have a lot of work to do.
Ellen, it's all yours. Oh, hold on one second. Ellen, is there anything else you would like me to say about your resume or about your background? I think it pretty much speaks for itself. You've been with the state in this position since 2006. Ellen? Are you muted, Ellen?
Madam Chair, I think she's having an issue. Philip, will she need to come back in and go back out and come back in?
She may.
Ellen, I think you might be having an audio issue. If you go to audio and video and select switch audio, does it say you're using computer for audio? So it does. I would go down to the to below that where it says call in, and you can use your cell phone to call in so that you can have audio through that while still having the video through your computer. It should give you a number to be able to call in along with access codes and IDs.
She's got a PowerPoint she wanted to share with us also.
I can make her a presenter, so she'll be able to present stuff to the committee while also being able to speak through her phone.
That's perfect. Let's do that. Don't we love technology?
Alan, I've made you presenter, so you should have options to share your screen if you need to.
Can you hear me now? Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry. Let me know if you hear background noise. My apologies. My computer, we just migrated from WebEx to Microsoft Teams. So they've been integrating the new Microsoft Teams. So I apologize for that. So I can just go up here and share my screen. Is that right? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. It should have a share option down below where you have some options.
Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I apologize. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you. I actually am a resident of Davidson County. I've been here since 1991. Before Davidson County, I actually lived in Williamson County, so I'm excited to get to talk to you a little bit about CIT. I'm also glad that Amanda Brock's also on the phone or on the call, because she can actually help put a lot of emphasis and input on this as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Please let me know if I'm talking too fast. I'm used to doing presentations a lot, and so I have to move through for time. So please let me know if I'm going too fast, and I will slow down. So CIT, I'm sure probably everyone that's actually in this meeting has probably heard of CIT in some form or fashion. So what I'm going to do this evening is just kind of do a real global overview. I'm not going to get down into the real meat and potatoes of it, because I think there is some other agencies, some national agencies, and some other community providers that would really be beneficial to get down into the real meat and potatoes of it. So I'm just going to kind of give you an overview. But Crisis Intervention Team is a community partnership, law enforcement, mental health and addiction professionals, individuals who live with mental illness and substance use disorders, their families, and other advocates in your community. And crisis intervention teams basically help educate law enforcement about treatment of individuals with behavioral health issues, and it also provides law enforcement with skills to do their job more safely and effectively. This is not saying that law enforcement does not do a good job the way that they do their job currently. It just gives them extra tools in their toolbox to deal with a specific population that sometimes can be really difficult and challenging when they have to work with them. The crisis intervention team, the model, which most of you have probably heard of, is the Memphis model, actually was developed in 1998. It came out of Memphis, Tennessee, when they actually had a police fatality with a young man. And from there, that is how the whole CIT training and the team model came to be. In 2019, the University of Memphis actually has a CIT center, and they reported that there are about 2,700 CIT programs within the United States. And when they talk about the CIT programs across the United States, they're talking about more local community programs than they are statewide CIT programs. There's more pockets of local community programs, like different counties that do CIT programs, than it is on a statewide basis. The basic goals of CIT is really to improve the safety during law enforcement encounters with people that are experiencing a behavioral health crisis. It also increases the connections to effective and timely behavioral health services for these people in crisis. That's basically getting them to their mental health co-op, Centerstone, crisis centers quickly, and get them there so that then the officers can get back out and do what they need to do. It also, a goal is to use law enforcement strategically during a crisis situation. Many times, law enforcement is really there to help with an imminent threat and also for safety, or if there's a criminal concern, and then also bringing in the training around how to deal with individuals in crisis, and other behavioral health professionals and peers can actually help the law enforcement officers be able to do their part of the job, and also let the other individuals that are experts in that area do theirs. It also reduces the trauma that people experience during a behavioral health crisis, and thus it contributes to their long-term recovery. The CIT training is pretty extensive. It's a 40-hour training, and I'm sure later on if you have questions that Amanda can probably help answer some of the training, because I think that they actually do quite a bit of training around CIT and certain curriculums in the state and the Middle Tennessee area. But law enforcement and first responders, it's really important to get as many of the first responder people that work and that actually come on site to begin with, that they learn about mental illness, developmental and intellectual disabilities, barriers with the elderly, child and adolescent issues, psychopharmacology, and suicide. Many times, people will go and officers will go on site and basically think someone has a mental illness when actually they end up having a developmental disability or an intellectual disability. Sometimes with the elderly, it may not be so much a mental illness, that they might have dementia, or they might have some because of their advanced age, it could be some cognitive issues. Also TBI, traumatic brain injury, falls into the same category. Children and adolescent issues, many times that's another area. And also understanding all the nuances around suicide and attempted suicide. Officers learn how to recognize situations and change their approach to provide the best treatment and outcome. They learn how to actually use good de-escalation skills and actually how to calm a person in a crisis. It gives the officers and first responders the tools and skills to de-escalate and to be able to work with these individuals where without the training, the CIT training, that they may not be able to have the equipment they need to best address the behavioral health population that possibly would be in a crisis. Again, I said it's an intensive 40-hour training curriculum. I will tell you that the training curriculum that came out of Memphis, I've put some websites, some actual links at the back of the PowerPoint. It's the CIT International. That is probably one of the best websites to use when you're talking about if you think you might want to start CIT, a real CIT program in your county or your jurisdiction. They have tons and tons of resources, and they're great. They can talk to you on the phone. They can help with training. They can do all kinds of things if people in different counties want to take this option. There's also additional parts to the training besides just the 40-hour training. And most of that training, the good thing about the CIT training is that they actually do a lot of scenarios. They actually do scenarios of how they would actually work with someone or interact with someone that was in a crisis in the community. And I think that's really the meat and potatoes of the whole CIT training. It really shows officers how to actually interact with them. They also have some other training that's part of it, individual diagnosis. And we talk about individual diagnosis. We don't delve into all of the DSM-5 and everything, because that is like just 3,000 pages long and thick. Different medications, de-escalation, many times talking about the civil and legal court processes for some of these individuals, especially when there's going to end up being some type of commitment. And, you know, that happens quite a bit sometimes. And then the perspective of individuals that live with mental illness and their family members that have to actually, you know, support these individuals that have the behavioral health issues. CIT is really a community effort. It is a community effort because it really takes, you know, as you develop and implement your team, basically you've got to have the first commitment is law enforcement and advocates and the behavioral health community. If law enforcement doesn't have the buy-in to actually want to be part of the CIT team or actually provide the training to the officers, then it's probably not going to work. So they work together to ensure that responding officers are trained and they identify the situations that need the crisis intervention team. You actually can have officers that are the true crisis intervention team officers. And then you have other ones that are just your regular officers that may not have gone through the training and may not, you know, be a part of that team. So basically the regular officer, if they come upon a situation, would end up having the CIT officers call to the scene. Then the regular officers would back up, basically provide some type of you know, outer circle surveillance and help if they need to. And if things are going well with a CIT trained officer, then that officer that initially responded to the call could move on somewhere else and the CIT team could take over from there. The community behavioral mental health agencies in the community do a lot of training for law enforcement. And I know Amanda's on here, and I know they do quite a bit of training for law enforcement in Davidson County as well as other counties. And so that is really important to have a really good relationship to get not only just the CIT training, which has got several modules that can be part of it, but also other training as well. Ideally, once a crisis intervention team they come to the call, they kind of de-escalate the situation. They keep everyone, the persons and the bystanders safe, and then they put those involved basically in the contact with the correct mental health resources. So basically the whole idea is that this person is having a mental health crisis or actually having some type of substance abuse crisis, which many of us, you know, it's always really, CIT was first formed around the mental health population, but now that we actually have so many different variations of opioids, synthetic opioids coming into the area, we actually are now having quite a bit of substance use type crisis calls, especially around fentanyl and officers having to do overdose reversals and those type of things. So it's kind of it's morphed into both, you know, both mental health and substance abuse. CIT officers would actually attend regular in-service training. They're going to be doing everything they would normally do that they would have in their regular office law enforcement training. But they also then attend a lot of other trainings around mental health, substance abuse, de-escalation skills, things like that. Many cities often have a very small number of officers who are trained in crisis intervention. And then these specially trained officers are called to the situations. They actually, a team, they go. And then they actually, when they get there, again, as I said, the other officers that kept, you know, the regular officers then would back off and go and do what else they needed to do. I would say that a lot of the CIT programs in Tennessee, and honestly, we don't have that many. Right now, we probably have, and Amanda, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we probably have maybe 12, 14 at the most. I know we have 7 that are really coming on and ramping up, but we don't have a lot, to be honest. We don't have a lot. We have some small pockets, but when, you know, we have lots of officers that actually have CIT training, but they it's really not the team. So in some of our rural areas, you're just going to have a CIT officer that's trained, whereas like in Memphis, they actually have a whole CIT team that they go to, you know, they have them on different shifts and they actually show up. The core elements of CIT is basically we're going to have, you're going to have ongoing elements, which this is the meat and potatoes of the whole program. You're going to have partnerships, law enforcement, advocacy, behavioral health. The community has got to have ownership and want this to be part of what goes on in the community. And that's from the mayor, the county commission, again, sheriff, jail administrators, law enforcement, chief of police, judges, probation, parole, DA, public defender, you know, individuals that just live out in the community, that they all have to have buy-in for the program to really work and work effectively. And you've got to have good policies and procedures. That's something, anytime that you're changing systematically on how you do, you know, policing, or even in like in the court system, if you have like a specialty court, you have to have policies and procedures that support what you're doing in order to make sure that you're doing it correctly and that you have a framework to make sure that it does no harm and that you're doing the community good. There's going to be operational elements as well. Of course, the CIT officer, you're going to have the officers, you're going to dispatching, the individuals that dispatch 911. It's important for them to understand when they're talking to people and dispatching officers to understand what type of situation they might be going in. And also a CIT coordinator. Sometimes that actually is just, that can take place sometimes at a behavioral health agency, or sometimes that person is implanted in the law enforcement office. You got to have the curriculum, and there's many. If you go out, and again, I put the links on the back of this, the CIT International, they actually lay it all out for you and help put it all together. They have different modules and stuff, and there's many law enforcement agencies across the United States that have all kinds of different modules where they put it all together for the 40-hour training to make sure that they meet all of the benchmarks that they need. And you got to make sure you have a good receiving facility. That's your behavioral health crisis drop-off centers, things like that. Mental health co-op in Nashville is the one that we have. In other areas, we have different, like Centerstone does different areas of the state. We have great crisis teams. The crisis team is a big part of the CIT team as well. And you got to have sustaining elements. You got to have evaluation and research. When you start this, you got to figure out what you want your outcomes to be. Again, what are your deliverables going to be? How much are you going to actually put forth? Are you going to start small? Are you going to have like just a team of 2 or 3 officers that they rotate based on their shift? Are you going to look at the times of day that you actually have more of the instance of people that are, officers are being called to people in the community that have crisis situations, things like that. Also in-service training, recognition and honors. Anybody that actually works in, you know, CIT team, I mean, that is above and beyond. Individuals, most of the time when they're part of a CIT team, they're doing above and beyond their regular law enforcement job. And also, you know, they're going in and doing the really hard work because they're doing one-on-one communication with people in crisis. And also outreach, developing CIT in other communities, and also like possibly in other local law enforcement agencies. I could see in Davidson County where if it was done with Metropolitan, for example, that they might actually possibly work with MTSU's campus or TSU's campus, the police at TSU, Vanderbilt, Belmont, different places like that to actually get the whole community, because you're going to get some action on some of the college campuses as well when it comes to crisis situations. Key partners, this is pretty simple. The necessary partners is law enforcement, first responders, behavioral health, community services and support, and advocacy groups. NAMI, Tennessee, and Mental Health America are wonderful. They all support CIT in any communities. They think it's a good way to actually address and help the the behavioral health population when they're in crisis. Additional partners that are important: probation, school resource officers, the 911, correction, the VA police department, the Veterans Police Department, the university, as I said, different states, the state troopers, hospital security, and other CIT connections. You can pretty much build the connections that can help you have a successful program in your community. Implementing CIT, many jurisdictions are not able to adopt every component of CIT. There's some that can. I will tell you that in a lot of the bigger urban areas, Shelby County, here in Davidson County, Knox County, they actually can pretty much implement a majority of the CIT model because they actually have more resources available in the urban areas than they do in some of the rural areas. And some of the reasons that they don't implement all of the CIT model is they may have a lack of resources. We all know that, and I'm just going to put it out there, everybody knows that I'm just very truthful about stuff, is that right now being a law enforcement officer is not a real exciting job. It's just, I mean, there's going to be some struggles. Also capacity. Some law enforcement agencies just have enough officers to get by with their regular, you know, jobs that they have to do, the different shifts that they have to fill. So they're not sure that they actually can ask them to do any more. And then some actual law enforcement agencies don't consider all the CIT components to be essential. Some of them feel like that they have other ways of doing this type of work that seems to be better in their and works better in their jurisdiction. I mean, everybody, you know, has got a way that they feel like it's the best for them to do it. There have been some jurisdictions that actually have implemented CIT fully, but also then they've gone above and beyond and added other enhancements. Knox County is an example I can give. They actually have full CIT going on, but they also do have behavioral health workers that actually ride along during peak hours there in Knoxville. They started this in 2013 through a grant they got with SAMHSA. And so they actually, at their peak hours on weekends and like sometimes from 9 to 2 in the morning, they actually have ride-alongs. They have actual clinical social workers that ride along with law enforcement. And they go to the homeless camps and places like that and go with them just to make sure that the population, they can help them determine if somebody is like looking like they might be a little bit off and, you know, talk to them and say, you know, it looks like you're probably not on your medication. Maybe we can get you in for an appointment, and actually kind of ward off some of the activities before they actually get into a crisis situation. The positive outcomes, real quick, it improves officer level attitude and behavior as far as dealing with the behavioral health population in crisis. When they have training to understand where these people are coming from and how much trauma that they're in, lots of times the way that they view what they have to do is much different. It's much more positive. It improves their knowledge and attitudes around stigma regarding the population. Again, stigma with the behavioral health population that's in crisis is a big issue. It still is. It's one that's going to, every jurisdiction works on all the time. It just is going to be something that's very slow to actually continue to move forward with. And several studies have demonstrated that there's been a significant reduction in the use of force by officers being trained, CIT trained. They figured out that there's times that maybe before that they had this type of training that force was used, but now they perceive that they can do it in a different way, and the physical force may not be something that's necessary. And also CIT programs have shown a reduction in the cost associated with SWAT call-outs. And again, with that, sometimes, you know, you have somebody that's in a crisis, they may be ready to jump off a bridge, or they may, anything like that. Sometimes in some jurisdictions, the only option for people is to call out the SWAT team. And CIT trained officers and CIT teams can actually help that whole, I guess, munition of people to be called out. That's a lot of manpower. That's a lot of movement that has to be called out. So when you have teams of CIT, they can actually go out and do that. And you know, the basic cost for them to do it based on a whole team, a SWAT team, is very different in what it actually costs. CIT improves the occupational health outcomes of police officers. It improves their ability to safely de-escalate the situations. They may not be actually having as many scuffles with these individuals. We know that happens. We know that there's lots of times there's a lot of agitation going on. And again, it can help reduce unnecessary force. And it also helps law enforcement stay focused on crime. Many times they have to go and they have to respond to crisis calls, and really the person just needs someone to talk with them, calm them down. And again, a specialized team that can work with individuals like that and determine, you know, if they just needed to be de-escalated and then basically sent to the crisis center, this, that, and the other, and working with the crisis team, have them come out instead of actually having to take them to jail when there really is not, quote, a crime or a crime of significant purpose that's been committed. That's a win. Sometimes some communities found that CIT has reduced the time officers spend responding to these calls. Again, they can call the CIT team in, or they can call crisis in and get them to take care of it, and then they can get back to the job that they need to do. CIT is not just about law enforcement and how they respond. It's really a community response. It addresses how behavioral health professionals and other supports are involved in the community crisis response. CIT really examines how a system that's put together, law enforcement policing is put together, and looks at the problems. There could be outdated policies or certain gaps and lacks in services. They actually could contribute to a crisis situation and develop solutions based off looking at the systematic challenges. And one of the ways that many of the, at least here in Tennessee that I know of directly, that they've come to actually start implementing CIT is we've had several communities actually go through sequential intercept mapping training. And I believe Davidson County did it several years ago, and Amanda might be able to tell me exactly when, but I can't remember exactly. But that's basically mapping out your whole criminal justice system from intercept 0, which is, you know, before anybody ever gets arrested, that's your first encounter with law enforcement, whether it be a crisis situation, and it goes all the way through intercept 0 through 5, and 5 is actually when it's a prison reentry. And so a community looks at their criminal justice system, looks at all the services they have available, and they take those services and then they look in each one of the intercepts and see where they have gaps. And so that's helped with a lot of CIT programs that have started here across Tennessee. This steps to CIT, this one is really pretty simple. Build a network of relationships. You've got to have ongoing commitment from the leaders, and that's behavioral health, law enforcement, mayor, county commission, all those people. You got to understand the community-wide response to the behavioral health crisis in certain situations, specifically those where CIT will be needed. You got to build infrastructure. And when I say build infrastructure, the first thing most people say is infrastructure costs money. Yes and no, infrastructure costs money, but many times in these type of setting up CIT, you figure out that you already have some of the infrastructure in place and some of that actual funding for that infrastructure, and you look at it again with the sequential intercept mapping. You have certain things you've already funded with infrastructure, and you figure out you really don't need it in that place, and then you can actually move current infrastructure funding to help with things like CIT. Creating training programs for law enforcement. You can never, ever, even myself, even anybody that's in the behavioral health field, I can never have enough training. I always learn something new. I always learn a different way to do something that you know, it's going to help. And the same with law enforcement, first responders, and anybody in the community. And it's a commitment to ongoing improvement and engagement with the partners. Many times CIT programs start, and they start really hot and heavy, and they go really quick. And then, you know, let's be honest, you get new mayors, you get new sheriffs, you get new chiefs of police, you get new DAs, you get new judges, and then sometimes with all the change that happens, the programs actually kind of go on the wayside. So it's that commitment to keep it ongoing. That's really important. This is the last, I'm almost done. Tennessee is actually right now, the state of Tennessee, we currently have a justice and mental health collaboration program going on. It's a grant through the Department of Justice. And we have 8 counties that are expanding CIT under this current grant. But what we have determined as this is a state grant, they also have the county level grants that people can go for to implement CIT that's county specific. It doesn't have to be through a state. And so we're going to continue to actually apply for this grant over and over to help counties that want to start going in the direction of CIT. And those 8 counties are Sumner, Wilson, Smith, DeKalb, White, Putnam, Overton, and Cumberland. They're kind of all on the plateau. So there's grants out there to help this. There's grants, most grants that have to do with criminal justice type of initiatives usually come out in January and February. They come out from the Department of Justice as well as the Substance Use and Mental Health Association, SAMHSA, which is part of HHS. And these are the 2 resources I was talking about, the CIT International, and if you click on these links, it'll take you directly to their home webpage, and also NAMI Tennessee. And NAMI Tennessee actually has a document that they did through a CIT planning grant that we had that basically talks about moving CIT forward in the state of Tennessee. And I actually, you can go here and look under resources under NAMI TN, and they have a summary of it. And then they also have a 260-page document if you want to read that. But that's it.
It's actually sitting on my desk right now if anybody wants to borrow it. Ellen, when we had talked about a grant that Knoxville had used to start their program. So there are grants out there that are available to start programs, and this particular grant was over 5 years, was it not?
That's correct. That's correct. Yes, it was a SAMHSA grant. It was a SAMHSA grant, and it was really about, basically about pre-arrest diversion. It was called not like pre-arrest diversion like we have in our department where we've got infrastructure money for that, but actually it was just like different ways looking at how you can divert people before they actually ever have to go into the doors of the jail. And that's where they came up, and they were already doing CIT in Knoxville at that time, so they wanted to add another layer. So that's when they actually started doing the ride-alongs with a clinical social worker to help, go on the ride-alongs and help be there with them and actually help look at some of the population that was out there and help determine that some of them might be getting ready to be in some type of crisis, so kind of cut it off before it happens.
But this is something we could use to train the police officers if we chose to implement something like CIT, correct?
Yes, ma'am, and you can. And again, I'm going to defer to, Mental Health Co-op with Amanda, because they do a lot of training. And so they are great with the training. So yes, there's lots of opportunities. And I would say, looking at the CIT international documents and also NAMI Tennessee, you've got lots of resources that it talks to you about training, and it goes into detail about how to really get started.
Amanda?
Yes.
You're up.
All right. Well, thank you. And if we could make Adam Graham the presenter, let me first, hello everybody. I'm Amanda Brock. I'm Senior VP of Clinical Services at the Mental Health Co-op. And I've got two members of my team with me, Adam Graham and Michael Randolph, here with me virtually. I just wanted to introduce them. Adam is the director of our crisis services, and Michael is the program manager of our crisis services and also our police liaison. And they are more directly involved in the day-to-day operations of what's currently taking place and what our current partnerships are with Metro PD. But just taking over from what Ellen said, we do, and you'll see in this presentation, a lot of training currently for Metro PD. And we'll go through what some of that is. And over the years, a lot of things have evolved. But I will say training is something that has definitely intensified, probably more so in the last 4 to 5 years. And and we feel like that we're doing a lot of good training. But as Ellen was talking about with CIT, I think one of the things that's often missed, that CIT is not, as Ellen rightfully said, not just about training. It's about a whole continuum and a whole team of care that you train. You also evaluate, are you effective or not? And those are some things that we don't have here currently in Nashville. So I'll move on from that. So what we're going to talk about is how our current emergency psych services in Nashville interacts with Metro Nashville Public Schools. We were asked to talk about that and how we respond with them, as well as Metro Nashville Police Department. And a lot of this has come from collaborations that have been spearheaded by the health department in getting the key players, us, Metro Schools, the health department, and other agencies together to talk about where are the gaps in the system, where are we struggling, and then realizing that there's a lot of misperceptions out there about what each individual agency can and can't do. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Adam, and I think hopefully y'all can all see his presentation up on the screen right now.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor and a privilege to be with you. Like Amanda said, my name is Adam Graham. I'm a licensed professional counselor and get to serve as the director of emergency psychiatric services with Mental Health Co-op. I'm joined here with Michael Randolph, the program manager of our crisis services. So we're going to partner on this. I'm going to spend the first half talking about our partnership with Metro Nashville Public Schools, and then hand it off to Michael to talk about our partnership with Metro Police Department. So to start off with our partnership with Metro Schools, in broad brushstrokes, Metro Public Schools serves about 86,000 students in Davidson counties over the course of 130 schools. And from time to time, there are students who are on campus, when they're on campus, who go into a psychiatric crisis that is their behaviors become to a point where they can't manage it, or even to the point of imminent danger to themselves or others, through suicidal thoughts or homicidal thoughts or really intense symptoms, so that they become behavior so out of control that they might harm themselves or harm someone else. So clearly, this is a community partner that we want to help out for the betterment of the children in Nashville. So our partnership over the years has taken three main expressions: our training with them, our co-response to youth who are in a crisis, and our strategic interventions to solve problems that come up on a systemic level. So from the training angle, we have really three main goals, whether it's myself or Michael or someone from our team, meeting with the school counselors and social workers who are there, also the student resource officers, really the frontline staffs who are going to be encountering students who may be getting to the point of being in a crisis or in a full-blown mental health crisis. We want to unpack for them through a discussion format what a crisis is, those engagement strategies of what helps in a crisis, both on that interpersonal level, but then also here's the 3 steps that you can take to help get this youth connected to care. And then very specifically what it can look like for best practices for a school counselor or a student resource officer to partner with mobile crisis response team to help that student get to safety and get to treatment so they can get back to the life that they want to live. Our second way of partnering with the schools is through a co-response model. What I mean by this is that the initial responders are often going to be the school counselor, the student resource officer, and we want to come alongside them. So we'll have a mobile crisis counselor, which is going to be a master's level clinician, go to the school on site and collaborate with the folks on the ground, the counselor, the student resource officer, as well as looping in the student's family to get a really full picture of what precipitated this crisis, what's sustaining this crisis, most importantly, what's going to resolve this crisis in the least restrictive method. What I mean by that is we don't want to go straight to hospitalization if that's not what's needed. That can be really intense for youth. And so are there community solutions by connection to more supports or a more robust safety plan or some special steps that we can take even with the school to create an environment that is safe and supportive for the youth so they can work through their crisis without the really intensive interventions of a hospital. What that looks like is this is our number of youth crisis calls by month over the last calendar year by location. So the top gray line is the number of calls that our youth crisis team responds to. So most of them are still occurring at an emergency room. That's still just a default response by parents, is if their youth is in a crisis, they want to take them to an ER. You'll notice everything kind of dipped down around March and April with the pandemic. But since then, we've seen a really pretty sharp increase in those calls starting to come back at ERs. Middle line are the community response. So when our crisis counselors actually go to the home or to a public location where a youth is in crisis to work through it. And the blue line is the number of crisis assessments that are happening at schools. So we were doing about 10 to 20 every month until April when schools went out of session. We also didn't respond at that point. So that's what it's looked like for us to do co-response and community calls out for youth who are in a crisis. The big headline and one of the main things we try to do is help youth work through the crisis in a safe and as least restrictive way possible. So over that last calendar year, or from September to September, 76% of the time, when we engage with a youth who's in crisis, we're able to come up with a solution other than psychiatric hospitalization, whether that's bolstering outpatient care, a really robust safety plan, or creating special treatment plans with the school so that the youth can work through this in the community. And I know numbers are great. I'm a big fan of numbers, but I also know it only tells part of the story. And so one narrative, one case that can kind of typify or can show what this can look like is the case of Will. Will's not his actual name. We want to protect his privacy. This is an 11-year-old who last year at KIPP Academy said he wanted to kill himself and ran up onto the roof. This also speaks to our partnership with Metro Police. They were the first responders as well as EMS who made contact with Will up on the roof. And then actually Michael was the crisis responder going up there as well to engage, de-escalate Will, find some kind of common ground so we can connect and find a way to help him step away from the ledge, but not just step away from the immediate danger, we'll come up with a plan of what's going to keep him safe for the next day, and what's going to be the support and treatment resources he needs going forward to live the life that he wants to live in the community. And you know, Michael's a fantastic at doing this, and they were successful. This is Will away from the ledge, and they're actually putting his shoes back on him at this point because he kicked his shoes off. So this is some of the work that we do on the ground. And the last way of partnership that we engage in is strategic intervention. And this is staying really well connected to our community stakeholders to identify systemic problems that are going on and then collaborate with those community stakeholders to implement solutions to those problems. So one that some folks on the call are going to be familiar with, that a couple of years ago, there was a really big problem identified of youth under 12 being arrested from public schools, and at a rate that was not helpful for the youth or for our community. And so juvenile court convened a session with emergency psych services and with Metro Police, and we're able to find really some key takeaways. One, on our end, that we were being too specific on the calls that we were responding out to at the schools, and that we needed to broaden our approach of, if a school reaches out with a youth, particularly under 12, that even if it doesn't fit within the specific box of imminent danger to self or others, we need to be responding because that behavior has become untenable. But then also Metro Police was able to say, hey, if we encounter a youth 12 and under at a school, we're always going to reach out to mobile crisis to see if there's a diversionary option here. So through this collaboration and this creative solution finding as a group, we were able to reduce the number of arrests happening at Metro Public Schools by 73% in just 1 year. And from 59 arrests in the 17-18 school year down to 13 in this past year, it dropped even further down to 4 arrests. One of those things where it didn't cost any extra money. It's just about an approach of realizing that together we're going to be able to identify solutions better than just any one partner. And so being committed to those strategic interventions.
And I just want to add to that, in the meeting that we had when this came to light, it was Metro Schools saying, well, we don't know who to call. We call Metro PD. Metro PD goes to the school, the kid is acting out, and they were like, well, we don't know what to do because they're not saying they're suicidal or homicidal, therefore we're not calling crisis. And that's when I said, whoa, wait a minute. Mobile crisis is who you should call, even if the kid's not saying they're suicidal or homicidal, because we were originally focusing on elementary school age children who don't come out and say they're suicidal or homicidal when they're having an emotional disturbance. They act out. And so just by getting everybody in the room and saying we need to change our own systems, we were able to make this really good change. And it helped officers to know that when they got those calls, they could call us. They weren't just there going, now what do I do with this kid? My only option is take them down to juvenile.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Amanda Perry. Unpacking that. So that's our partnership with public schools, the training, co-responding, and the strategic intervention. I'm now going to hand it off to Michael Randolph to talk about our partnership with the Metro Nashville Police Department. We're actually going to literally hand off by changing seats here.
Hi, I'm Michael Randolph again. Thanks for letting me come talk to y'all, and I'll be talking about our partnership with Metro Nashville Police. And basically this comes down to our training partnership is education, experiential learning, and continued engagement. I'll go through all three of those and kind of explain everything and answer any questions. We can all answer questions at the end. Gotcha. So education starts in the police academy. We do 12 hours of in-classroom lecture. These are lectures we pretty much we get them as close to CIT as possible for the lecture portion. It's about the mental health system. What will mental health look like and feel like if you encounter it out in the community. We do lectures on suicide, depression, how to talk to people, de-escalation, and things like that. We go beyond that. We designed in-classroom de-escalation scenarios. So they had 8 hours of practice. This is not tactics focused. It's just to practice their active listening skills and their de-escalation skills. And they just sit in the classroom, and then our staff is the role players. And we just practice all day of how to talk to people who are in a mental health crisis. The experiential learning is something that we do pretty uniquely here in Nashville, and it's kind of based on how police officers train for tactics is they make it as realistic as possible. So when they practice for a mass shooting event, things like that, it's all a big simulation. They try to make it as realistic, and they find that helps people learn those kind of things. So we took what they were learning from that and made mental health, took experiential learning in a mental health direction. So in the police academy, before any trainee graduates, they go through simulations for different kind of calls. And Nashville Police Department Academy reached out, and together we designed a scenario for an individual in a suicidal crisis with mental health issues. Also could be hearing voices, things of that nature. And this is evaluated and taught by veteran police officers and mental health professionals from our services. We designed the grading rubric in collaboration between us and the police. So they are graded on not only their tactics of the situation, which the police focus on, but we also grade them on their verbal de-escalation skills. And the goal of this is, so somebody with a knife is experiencing a suicidal crisis, and they are graded on their verbal de-escalation skills. The role player will escalate if their skills are not so good and come down when their skills are good. And we'll run this a few times until most officers have learned the process. And they'll get how to talk to a suicidal individual, how to do verbal de-escalation, and then how to get someone help after they de-escalated in Davidson County. Another big part of our training partnership is continued engagement. We do yearly in-service mental health training with the police, and this is 1 to 2 hours of mental health training of a topic that we usually collaborate with. We'll go into that in a second. And then every officer from the chief down has to go through this training. We also provide mental health training services for specialty teams, like such as sex crimes, missing persons, gangs, counterterrorism, domestic violence. So they'll reach out, ask for some sort of mental health training on things they're seeing in the field, and then we will try to provide it the best we can or connect them with someone who can. We also do a very intensive training with the SWAT crisis negotiators. We put them through a full 40-hour CIT style training for all negotiators and SWAT commanders, even on the tactical side, so they know what their negotiators are doing. This includes lectures, guest speakers, in classroom and reality-based scenarios. And we also invite NAMI out, do the hearing voices workshop, so officers experience what it's like to hear voices, what kind of problems they would have negotiating with someone who could be actively hearing voices, and what that's like, and it kind of teaches patience. It's one of the activities I enjoy doing the most. We also do quarterly mental health in-service for the SWAT negotiators, and we debrief for mental health related SWAT callouts. We get a lot of barricaded suicidal subjects in Davidson County, and we had to come together and make a really good partnership because this has kind of increased more and more the last 5 years, and we've been able to do a lot of great things with it. As part of that, we do reality-based SWAT callouts, and so we design scenarios to be as realistic as possible. We actually got a city bus for one of them, and we put the whole negotiator team through a full, it was an hour-long scenario for each scenario. We did 6 scenarios, and they rotated through, and they would get to practice all of their skills, getting collaborative information, things of that nature, and then our staff was the role players. And the most important part of continued engagement and to have really good success with training the police is to learn what's working and not working. And so, I go out to the patrol committee meetings. This has a lot of patrol sergeants that meet every month. And I ask them, what are they seeing out there? What training is working? What's not working anymore? Is there things you feel like officers need to know, what you need to know? And I get feedback with that. We also meet with the academy, who sends out their surveys to find out what their trainings are effective or not effective. And then we make adjustments based on their feedback. And that's a brief overview of the training that we're doing with Metro Nashville Police at this time.
Does anybody have any questions for Ellen, Adam, or Michael?
Just go full screen.
No questions? Thank you all very much for being here. We really appreciate your participation.
Thanks for inviting us. If there's any follow-up questions later, just let us know.
We will. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, Sharon, you're up.
Okay. Well, actually, David, David,
I'm sorry.
anything to report from the data working group? I looked at the charge, give you a little more background, and looking at our charge, we're supposed to be looking at indicators, and they say to track our progress. For instance, for the community policing, we will look at zip codes with the highest arrest rates or demographics of diversity or crime rates. We will look at those data points in order to buttress our recommendation. And so is there anything you're seeing from that data group that would work to buttress some of the recommendations that we're coming up with?
Yeah, I guess is the shortest answer to that. We're I think what we're finding is that the data that exists, there are metrics that need to be tracked that are not currently being tracked. So we've been focusing a lot on that, and as it relates to this committee, you know, how the police interact with the community, in particular vulnerable communities, is something that is going to need some attention from what we've looked at so far. So we spend a lot. We had a data committee meeting this morning and focused a lot on what existing surveys exist, and talking about other cities and how they measure and record progress on general police interactions with communities and how communities feel about policing. And so I guess we've talked a lot about things that are not tracked that need to be tracked. I think what will be helpful is as we have draft recommendations, and I know we're going into that discussion now, but I can take to the data committee at our next meeting our draft recommendations and ask those specific questions, because at this point we've been focused on what kind of data needs to be tracked, but you know, we need to, and it sounds like part of our charge is to figure out from the existing data, how does that support or make us want to question what our recommendations are. In terms of a timeline, we're working towards the October 14 meeting with the representatives of the various committees, and so our effort is to have the data that supports or is needed for the draft recommendations and share those, as well as any observations that we have from the review of policies and procedures with that group on October 14, and then have some discussion about whether the additional data that we can ask for and provide the committees, or how the data that we have accumulated, how it supports or helps inform the recommendations.
Okay, that makes sense, because what we're doing is we have this session, which we dealt with one of our vulnerable populations that we've identified, people with mental health issues or crisis. The next session we have, which is the session before the 9th, which is when we'll have a draft that we have to present. We'll deal with the other vulnerable populations we have identified. So these are really the two working dates before that 14th date. So we will then flip to you for, I guess, the half-day session, the recommendations, and then we'll see what data there is or is not, or what we need to collect that we don't have that will help either support or disprove some of the premises or whatever. We'll just have to fit it all together in a half-day session. Is that the way you understand it, Judge?
Yes, but our final draft recommendation is due on the 9th.
9th, yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But we take that into that half-day session. Is that right, Eric? I think we take that draft into the half-day session.
Correct.
Okay. All right. All right. Did everyone receive a copy of the draft recommendations for our committee for us to work off the same document? Okay, well, I will assume we did. And this document is broken down into several recommendations. Frankly, some of these is really almost more so than recommendations. a summary of all the things we touched on so far in these conversations. So it really is more of a summary or synopsis as opposed to really being tight recommendations that we'll have to end up with. So we'll kind of go through these to see where the committee members have questions or concerns about the direction we're going in. We start off with the West Precinct because community policing is something I think that we have determined is worth a look at. The issue that we found is that community policing is defined in different ways, but we do like the West Precinct model. And this is subject to our discussion, but I think that's the direction we were going in. Neighborhood policing was presented. It seemed a little bit, not that we couldn't do it, we just want to be a little bit more realistic in what we recommend. That may be an ultimate goal somewhere down the line, but it didn't seem realistic given where Nashville is and really realistically looking at our budgetary constraints. So if we look at the West Precinct model, we see how we can roll that out in the community given certain priorities. The priorities, and this is really just coming from just our general discussion, is areas that need it the most. We know that there's some momentum behind rolling out community policing, but we have to have target communities because it takes resources, it takes energy, because what we don't want is for us to roll out community policing, then those who are charged with this kind of policing are called to other police activities. For instance, we know it works best when community policemen are doing just that role, not being called, oh, around the corner there's a robbery, so we're going to send you on that robbery. We want them to be focused on this because the relationship with the community is really their primary goal. We do know that we have to interface with the committee that's looking at how you hire police officers and train them, because from everything I've read and seen, these are really officers that have to have a commitment to building that trusting relationship with the community. So we did say that there's a need in community policing to have a relationship with community-based organizations. For instance, the Dream Center is very much engaged with the West Precinct. We know that in North Nashville, there's Gideon's Army, and they are maybe a partner for the policing effort in that community. So you cannot leave out these community groups. However, they too need some training to make sure they understand what community policing is all about. I'm going to stop there to see if anyone else thinks on that one subject, the community policing, what we should add, take away, adopt, or look at, or any thoughts that we have on community policing.
Yes, it's Jennifer Gamble here, and I so appreciate this outline that you have laid out for us, because it really helped me with kind of trying to centralize the thoughts based on what we've heard from all of our presentations, and then in trying to put together our recommendation. One comment that I have in regards to community policing, I think it will be helpful if we do kind of develop or hone in on some kind of definition of what we think community policing is, whether it's some of the from some of the information we got from I forget the sergeant, Pacanza, the West Precinct, where he talked about community policing being community involvement, consultation, problem solving, and relationship building, but something that we can put a definition to what our committee views as community policing. And also in talking about the West Precinct, flushing out what it is they are doing there. Like, for example, using their flex teams as community engagement teams, but giving more, details about what the West Precinct is doing and what we're recommending what we're recommending to implement around the city. And then, although I wasn't here last week, I did listen to the video. And there was a presenter, I forget the officer or sergeant's name, who talked about doing a regional approach instead of a precinct approach when it comes to flex teams or community engagement teams, that he found that the regional approach, because precincts have different, I guess, views and different people, and maybe are not touching, are going across different areas. He suggested a regional team or approach. So maybe it's not just the West Precinct or the North Precinct, but maybe it's the West and North as a regional working together kind of approach. So just an idea to think of there.
Yeah, that your point is well taken, because even when we were in the luncheon with Mayor Dean, he actually asked, well, what are they doing in the West Precinct? And we kind of had a feel for it, but being able to actually set out, this is the definition. So when you make the recommendation, everyone will know this is how many officers it will take to do this. These are the resources we would need. So we need something a little bit more concrete than we just like what West Precinct is doing. So.
Do you think one of us, not necessarily you or I, but somebody else on the committee, should call West Precinct Commander and ask him to spell out for us exactly what those components are?
I would be happy to do that. If we need a volunteer, I'd be happy to reach out and get more details and put it in a draft form to send to you all to review it.
I think
that'd be perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Very helpful.
And I also work on kind of a definition of community policing to add.
That'd be perfect.
Councilmember Gamble, do you want me to email Commander Corman and CC you on that and just make that connection right off the bat?
Great. That'd be great. Thank
you. Perfect. I'll do that.
Because we do need that, and that will sort of tie it up and tighten up what we're saying. Okay.
I think it would take out some of the items on here and solidify what we're saying.
Yes. And one other element of this community policing model that touched on these vulnerable populations, we felt as though part of the model, and I think when we get to specifics of West, number 2 may be taken care of, because how do they actually interface with people in the community? That's what leaves, immigration, all those sorts of other populations. How does community policing, as we have it in the West Precinct, how do they interface with these other models? Okay.
Actually, I like number 2 as a standalone recommendation, because where you talk about engaging with youth groups, programs, immigration and refugee outreach, I think we can flush that out a little bit more and maybe even add church and MMPD community conversations to that. I did listen to the town hall that Mount Zion hosted last week with Chief Drake, and it was great. And we need more of that. We need more church, MMPD collaboration and community conversations and engagement. So I kind of like that as a separate recommendation if we want to look at leaving it separate and maybe elaborate on it.
Well, and that was something that was brought up in the conversation with the SRO, was that was an important piece of their work, was community engagement.
Yeah, and it flows well into the next one, which is really, I think Eli was the one that brought this collective efficacy. And I think one of our other speakers talked about it too. And really, you're developing community standards of behavior that the whole community can support. And I think the churches will be critical to that, because it's going back to really what I call an old school community, where everyone in the community has certain behaviors. And there's an expectation that you're all benefiting the community if we all behave in a certain way. And there is power in that. And I think that is something that the police should help as far as the community policing, almost get, like you said, meeting with the community, the churches. Let us, let the churches, let other organizations help the police in building this trust, but they have to really be engaged with the organizations in order for that trust relationship to develop.
I was wondering in that regard, on that, I always call it collective impact, but apparently it's been updated to efficacy. But I think we need to be specific enough. I don't know that a recommendation that says we think this is a good thing. Do we need to recommend any sort of structure or to say someone should be specifically tasked with developing that network and also to the point that follows there on that about creating a community organization that philanthropic sort of gathering point for funds that could make this work as well. I just think again, yesterday was the National Public Education Foundation event. And so there's education. It may be a little harder to rally folks around criminal justice, but I don't know. Not right now, I don't think it is. I think that there's a window. So maybe something specifically about a leader within the police department charged with pulling all that together. And then a recommendation regarding some sort of establishment. And I think that's really there already, establishment of a community-based fund that folks could go for grants from various foundations or from individuals in the community.
The other thought about that fund was in conjunction with the CIT model and specific grant that Ellen Abbott had spoken of was a $5 million grant. It's $1 million each year for the first 5 years, and being able to pull other philanthropic organizations to supplement that, and to be able to partner with other groups, bring them along to work with the police department and other avenues, starting with that base, that $5 million grant.
That would be meaningful. That would be huge. That would work.
Well, and that would be such a boost to the police department to say that we had that $5 million grant to start this program with.
Rather than saying you have to find something to cut out of your budget and then do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what you would do, are you saying that the funding would flow to the police? And the police set up sub-grantees to interface with, but the funding would flow through the police department. Is that what we're suggesting?
Well, it has to flow through Metro, Sharon. Every dime has to go through Metro government.
I know, but it would be an appropriation to the police is what I'm getting at. And I think that's a good way, and I'm going to tell you why. On a nonprofit where you have to really, really struggle to keep it going, I think that people will always have a level of funding for police enhancement programs going through the police department, and they may not give it directly to the nonprofit. Those get cut very early. So I like that model.
Well, and as you know, Sharon, there are nonprofits in the city that will give money to partner with another grant.
May I ask? In order to follow the recommendation, is the $5 million? Is that just a suggestion of an amount that would be needed to foster these kind of programs, or are there specific philanthropies that have committed to that or expressed interest? How are we?
It's a specific grant, David, that Knoxville was able to obtain from the DOJ to start that program. And that was what Ellen had suggested to me when I originally spoke with her.
Okay.
We should go for it in January to start the program.
Great. All right. Thanks for the clarification.
Is this the other bullet point, that's the second part of number 3, where we said the committee recommends more intensive engagement between MNPD and community groups, as well as individual community members to further the concept of collective efficacy and a pathway? And then I guess, are we adding a funding source in this, or do we not need this paragraph at all? Because the concept, frankly, let me give you a little more background. The concept was really supposed to be that there are some things we ask the police to do that other organizations might be able to do better. But we always said police, police, police. For instance, even when we were listening to our last speakers, they said often the police get called, where really another agency might be able to do that if we have the proper training and we have the proper relationships. This is what this was supposed to be getting at, but we need to work on it.
I think you're there in our presentation today about from the crisis intervention teams really fits right in with that. I mean, if we look at joining bullet 2 and 3 together and maybe calling all of that collective efficacy and including the community groups, maybe the idea of the crisis intervention teams. I mean, that's kind of all of it, in my opinion. It kind of all goes together.
Yeah. Okay. And no, I guess number 4 we're talking about now. Now, number 4, I really want people to think about it. Here's the reason why I say this. Here's the way the reality hits. 20 years ago, the Weaver Domestic Violence Center opened, and this is a $3 million plus operation. We always have had to come to Metro for some money. Metro has given us anywhere between $200,000 and $275,000 of the $3.1 million budget. Okay, you go out to the community and raise the funds, but this is considered an essential service because there's, not another resource for women and children who are victims of domestic violence to come to. With that said, this year things got really, really tight, and we know how tight things are. So when things got really, really tight, what happened was, because CARES funds were available, they supplemented those funds for the Metro funds, and you're going through that process, which is a whole different thing because they have to be spent by certain days. It's a lot different than when it was a Metro funding. So my concern is that if you make it directly a responsibility of the nonprofits and not have that money going to a source that Metro would fund readily, then you're really going to have a short-term fix versus a sustainable solution. I think there's definitely a role for the nonprofits, but we have to make sure we set up a mechanism so the funding is consistent and strong enough really to support the efforts.
I totally agree. And I'm trying to think of now, there are several funds, and John, you might be able to help us, where we have programs that were established. I'm thinking about the Nashville After School Zone Alliance, which is a part of the library foundation. But I totally agree. We need to have in our recommendation establishing some kind of fund to support this community policing and collective efficacy efforts. And I think your bullets 4, 9, and 11 all speak to that. It probably could be all in one recommendation. Number 4, 9, and 11.
I think we need to look at the DOJ and see what is available there.
Oh, yeah. We get funding, Office of Violence Against Women from the DOJ, but the nonprofit has to take on that and seek out that money. So you have to have grant writers, data people, and all those sorts of things in order to be able to get that. But there is that funding. However, that funding could even dry up depending on, how they want to renew the Office of Violence Against Women. You never know. You're always in that, whereas some things people are going to fund and some things people are going to decide, well, they'll find a way. So we're looking at combining 4, and I can write something up, 9 and 11. 9,
it talks about budgeting should reflect the cultural accountability, and then 11 talks about advocate for additional state and federal funding. And I agree with you. We could leverage whatever local and state funding we get for those grants from the federal organizations. Yeah.
Yes. That makes sense. Yes. Now, do we need to have a recommendation such as 5? Do we need to, and this is really just more of a statement about police handling things and the roles delineated and all that sort of thing. We may not need to have this. This is almost a background to what the other recommendations are. And really is looking at the same thing of communities, other organizations performing duties that the police are presently asked to perform, and a delineation of roles. For instance, if you're dealing with mental health, I still don't quite fully understand how a 911 operator makes a decision to send a crisis team, the police, or whomever. And hopefully you don't get into people sending different sorts of resources to different communities, because then you get into some real systemic issues that I hope we aren't going there. For instance, if you have someone doing the same activity in one zip code as opposed to another, does a 911 operator send a different sort of resource? And so that's why I don't know, are there clear guidelines on what 911 operators do? And I think that Eli brought up this point. How are they trained? How do they make these decisions? Because I see we have a wonderful resource. I mean, I think the presentation today was absolutely fabulous, but I know everyone doesn't get that when they're in a mental health crisis.
Sharon, and to echo what you were saying, when I was reading number 5, when it came to immigrant origin families and new Americans, the same concern comes to mind with our previous experience, is who do we go to when we hear rumors, when we're trying to dismantle what's happening? I mean, the myths around immigration being called for something that is not related to immigration or ICE, but it's just like a traffic situation. So I would appreciate some specificity, or at least saying that we need person that we can reach out to specifically address what you were saying, either 911 calls or very specific questions that we may have with law enforcement. And again, it's who do we pick up the phone when we get a call and say, is it true that immigration or ICE is making its rounds around this particular neighborhood, right? As organizations are tasked with this responsibility, do we call John? I'm just putting you on the spot, right? I'm trying to.
You can always call me.
Prevent the mistakes that the city made. What was it, a year ago? As we put a footprint or a framework on how to react.
So, for instance, if you heard, ICE is going to raid someplace and people are all upset and you don't know whether it's fact or fiction, is this a liaison in the police department, a liaison in the mayor's office? Where would this person be that you could call in? Because I've had things like that in our Girls Ain't Girls who are afraid and they're telling their people and they're telling me I always call the mayor's office. I just call somebody to find out. But
same, right? But that's because we have the legacy and the organizations, right? But if we're talking about putting something in paper and write a recommendation for this framework, I think it's important to at least delineate, is it the Office of New Americans, right? Is it who in the department is in charge of this, and someone that can guide us in real time?
That sounds like our Nashville hub, and I'm wondering if we can, if not, incorporate our community policing initiatives into something like the Nashville hub. You go there to find out anything. Who do you call for? Who do you call for a stop sign that's not working, or a traffic light? Something of that magnitude where it's an information center for all of Nashville. And I'm wondering if that's a great recommendation of having some kind of, or needing some kind of information network. It's just a matter of how can we implement that? Would it be a matter of implementing it in the hub, or establishing a new communication information network?
These police-centric matters, are these police-centric matters that we're talking about? For police-centric matters, having almost a separate is that what we're talking about? I'm not sure.
Well, I think we agree that we need some kind of information hub. My question is, I don't know if we can implement that into the Nashville hub that we have, or if we have to implement something new.
Well, and maybe that could be not just an information hub, maybe that same hub is the one that leads to action, leads to this group helping with this issue, with this mental health crisis or with this homeless crisis. I mean, yeah, there may again need to be somebody who knows what's going on all the time, but I just I always get hung up on thinking about structure and organization. But I think, Jennifer, I think you're really leading us in the right direction with those thoughts.
I just want to echo those thoughts. So the hub is in the process of pulling in some additional information from the police department right now. And there is a general push to sort of make 311 a clear alternative, because right now we've got 911, 311, and we've got the other another number. So that could be a good solution. Juliana, I think your question is also raises the question of, should there just be someone in the communications department at the police department that people could just call if there's a rumor, if they want accurate information. Of course, the precinct commanders are a good resource, but I can do a little work on all of these things. And I'd be curious to know what you think would be most useful. I mean, if there was should it be a call to hub for information? Should it be trying to call someone in the communications department at the police department? Of course, people can also reach out to Mohammed in the mayor's office. But we should think about what makes the most sense.
Do we need to look at number 6, the 911 processes, how that's determined? I know Amanda talked about, as part of what they do some training with them. I know CIT talked about training for 911 operators. Do we need to look at that from our standpoint?
I think it seems to me that that's kind of outside of our scope of what we're looking at. That may be more so policy, within the policy scope.
Okay.
So take 6 out. That's fine. Is that a problem with that? Okay.
Chief, I got a question about the number 6, because being that we are addressing the most vulnerable populations, which is what we say the mental illness, the juveniles, and the returning citizens, then that's how you can address their issues. A phone call or 911 or whatever the case may be, because when we looked at the community policing of the West Precinct, they never addressed the populations that we trying to provide for. The community the vulnerable populations that we are designed, or what we are here to design some type of format for. So of course we're gonna need some type of number that people can call to address the needs of the population that we supposed to be dealing with, whether it's returning citizens, whether it's mental illness, or whether it's juveniles.
I think that's what the council lady is going to confirm for us, is exactly what the issues that the community policing of West Precinct deals with.
Okay, but I'm saying, what population did they deal with? Only thing they did was lock up some people.
Well, but we're gonna tailor kind of what they're doing to address the needs of all of the city. So we're just using what they're doing as a template to help us pull together an outline of what we think should be done across the city to address, to serve all of our populations. So we're not just saying that just the West Precinct will be implementing this. We want all of the city precincts to work together in implementing this across the city.
I understand, but what are they implementing? If we are here to serve the vulnerable population, what are we implementing to serve them?
We're losing you. what they're talking, what we heard from the presentations from the Sergeant Jason, where he talked about the using the flex teams as community engagement teams going into the community. I mean, he talked about, I'll get more detail about that and share it with the committee before we make our final recommendation, but it'll evolve around what he discussed with us in his presentation several weeks ago.
And Larry,
even more.
And Larry, this does involve the engagement, intentional engagement with community groups in partnership as part of this, because the Dream Center, for instance, was one that was used as an example in the West Precinct. So it definitely involves coordination between community groups and community advocates in developing this trust relationship that stems from community policing.
And if you have any ideas, Larry, I would welcome any more input from you as far as in your experience working with Gideon's Army, there may be some things that you all are doing that the West Precinct isn't doing that we want to include in our recommendations. So, I would welcome you sending a few bullets or some information or some things that you think would help with the community policing as well. It may be in what West Precinct is doing, it may not, but we can definitely consider it in our recommendation, I would think. I think the committee might be agreeable to that.
You can come with me and walk through the neighborhood and we can talk to the people.
Well, I mean, that's part of this. It's actually
in and out. I couldn't hear you.
Part of this, you do have the community organization that police officers that are dedicated to this purpose sit down and they have community meetings with churches, community groups, various groups. When you roll out a program like this, this is one of the things that you do. And so this would be part of the process that you sit down and talk to members of the community and make them understand the purpose of you doing this, because it's going to take leaders in that community to help to sell this process. And once the police officers make this promise and commitment to the community, they absolutely have to keep that promise, because that's how you build the trust relationship. So absolutely, that is part of it. They will have to be there on the ground in the neighborhoods, talking to the people there to help them understand that we are here. We're changing the way that we have operate in the past. It's a new day. We want to build this trust. We want to have this relationship. And really, it's the same thing the officer described that he did in the West Precinct. Now, we're going to get more specifics. Councilwoman Gamble has said that, so we will bring that back to this group and let you see these specific things. But it definitely includes a level of grassroots community engagement.
All right.
And it's about them building trust. This is all about building trust in the community.
See, we have two prongs, the trust and the safety. And we have to get those two balanced, the community trust and the safety. And I think once you build the trust, then you can work toward having a safer neighborhood. We've seen that. Tom, did you have a comment?
No.
You just came up on the screen.
Now, come on, Tom. We know if we goad you a little bit, you're going to say something.
Yeah, we were talking about 6, and I think it's, I was agreeing that I thought it probably belonged somewhere else.
Okay.
I think that protocol of 911 and how to move things around is important, but I think it belongs outside of the community.
Yeah, I do think, though, it could affect the level of community policing, because if you start sending one group versus the other group, then, depending on who you send to the scene, I think it could affect that. But we'll just have to coordinate that through the people that are charged with the community policing. Okay, now number 7, I think that this is where we have an overlap of charges, because use of force was included in this metric, and I guess John or someone can help us. It shows that use of force is under our section, but it's also under another group's charge. So are we supposed to look at use of force or not? And the standards for de-escalation.
Let me take a look at the recommendations. So we're looking at number 6.
Number 7.
7.
See, we're looking at 7, but the only reason 7 is there is because, as I understood it, that was one of the things we're supposed to be looking at. We've heard nothing about it, never talked about it, never did anything on it, but it was listed under our category, but it's also listed under another group's category.
Sharon.
So I think that my own sense is that workforce is very focused on culture. The question of accountability and whether accountability mechanisms that currently exist are adequate is an important question. I'm gonna have to circle back to you on that after the policies committee does their draft recommendation tonight. And let's sort of see who's going to speak to that most directly. I expect the policies will, but if they don't, it definitely needs to be covered. We heard today about sort of the COB as an accountability mechanism. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about how the Office of Professional Affairs does accountability. We heard from President Smallwood, the head of the FOP. He made the claim that discipline is meted out at a higher rate in NPD than other police departments. 42% higher was his claim. There have been some discussion about fairness, and I know that that's something that the policy committee and the workforce committee are touching on. I may just need to circle back after policies, and also this could be one of those things to highlight for our data group discussion. How do we make sure that strong accountability standards are in place? It could make sense to do that when the data working group is all together.
Because the use of force was at the top of line of what we got from the mayor. Use of force is a big ticket item in building trust, how the community is treated, what officers do. So someone really has to touch on this on 2 prongs. One is just the general use of force, with different vulnerable populations, the mentally ill, the immigration, where that is, and that may be data. And number 2, when you have a group event, and group event is a community relationship issue, and when you have a group protest or something like that, what will be the policy on de-escalation and handling those? I have no problem if another group handles this, but it was mentioned as one of our charges. And this was one of the main reasons we're going through this exercise, is to look at this issue. And I know from a perspective of a community advocates, this use of force is a big deal. Who gets shot? I mean, this is it. This is the focus of a lot of these conversations like the ones we're having.
Yeah.
I think just pay close attention to what comes out of the policy group. From that perspective, we talked about use of force as a metric for how we move community policing through the various precincts, and how we measure how effective community policing is at reducing use of force. And that's the way I remember the discussion. Obviously, it's a big thing, and if we all are on this, if we don't like what comes out of policy, we get to raise our hand.
Yeah, no, Tom, I agree with that. I think that's where it fits into our charge. Not necessarily setting up, in this case, you do this, in this case, you do that, and the details, but again, as a culture of the department, a culture and pattern, that it would be more of a general statement coming from our committee that we want to achieve who knows how to de-escalate. We want to achieve who knows, there's lots of options here.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So Don, let us know.
Go ahead. Hello? Okay. So really what you're doing is moving toward that. For instance, if we have a culture of of using, for instance, lethal force as a last resort, the policy committee and training and all those could do those things, but we could say but somehow use of force is part of the culture. Do you go there early? Do you go there late? Is de-escalation a part of the culture of the officers in order to have less harm to the community psyche, so to speak? Is that kind of where we're going?
Well, policies is definitely very focused on de-escalation, how it's used, how it's measured. Is it adequate? Is the current definition adequate? They're definitely focused on use of force policies, and having the data committee look at how force is used against vulnerable populations. So I thought that the information about arrests, for instance, of MNPS students and what that trend line was, that was really interesting for me. It seems like it'd be nice, and it would be good to have some information on, what are the interactions like for vulnerable populations? Do we capture that now, or do we not capture that now? And I think that's things we can ask for through data.
Okay. So that the recommendation might be that they continue some of what Tom is saying. Use of force is a metric on how we judge community policing. As community policing.
I think that's a great point. Yeah. A very reasonable metric. We should see that declining.
Yeah.
That's what we want.
Okay. All right. And number 8, I think Melissa had the same issue with that, whether this is number 8 is outside the scope of this committee, and this is the culture of accountability. As culture is different from actually a policy, because you can have all the policies, but not the culture. They're 2 different things, but we can take this out if you feel as though this is outside of our scope. So we have less, stuff.
Yeah. I think that makes sense.
Okay. Judge Blackburn had to drop off the call. She is, she's gonna send a blurb on CIT. So take number 8 out. Is that what we're saying?
Yes.
I believe so, yes.
I agree. Take number 8 out.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay, and number 9, we've already combined 4, 9, and 11. So that's all about leveraging community support and community engagement and community organization. So those really make sense. Because I would like for it to be really tight and just have maybe, 4 or at most recommendations, but they're all really tight. And then number 10 really is looking at the SROs. Establish clear and consistent policies, because I gather from the comments we received that the SROs are viewed as if nothing else, I think they give peace of mind to the principals and those in the school. But the role of the SROs, I couldn't figure out what they were really. I could see they were resources. That's what the name implies, but I didn't know really what they were doing or what they weren't supposed to do, or if there's a fight, do they intervene? When do they call campus security as opposed to SRO? I didn't know what the little babies were doing in the lower schools. Because they were just on their own. I don't know. That's the only concern I had. So what about the little ones? But
I would like to make. Oh, I'm sorry, John. Tom, I was just going to make a comment about the SROs and just PD and schools in general. I think that is maybe an area that we could make a recommendation on, because in listening to the video last week, the presentation about how the SROs established the relationships with the youth, that's just more community engagement and involvement. I don't know if we move that to our community or collective efficacy piece, or if we leave it separate as police in schools or SRS officers or MMPD in schools. But I think it is an important component to include.
It's a key piece of community policing in my mind. I'm not sure how it fits in the overall scheme. We have to mention it, and it's a big part of community policing and the long-term impact of that.
That makes sense. And see, that was one of the specific areas they asked us to look at in this committee, is the SROs, but really it is a part of the community policing strategy, having these officers. And one thing that kind of concerned me and is that it appears as though these SROs and also the community policing officers are viewed as not real police and not doing real police work. And they're even not supposed to, I think, do the same police work that traditional police officers do. So that was a concern that they may be looked down on by the other, when you deal with that macho culture, you got to get into, different levels. And I think that the culture has to be such that we see this role as significant and important. That may be a lot to ask, but that this role is as significant, as important as the other police officers, because actually these officers can save you trouble down the road if you do this right.
If I may take the liberty and kind of summarize what we just said, because I've been writing some notes and I want to make sure I'm on target with what we're talking about. So if we look at the first recommendation title, community policing, and incorporate in that number 1 and number 10, and then the second recommendation, collective efficacy, and incorporate that in that number 2 and number 3. The third recommendation, establish some kind of fund and incorporate in that number 4, 9, and 11. And then the fourth recommendation, some kind of public safety information hub, and that's being number 5. Does that make sense? Is that what we're?
Now, what was number
saying?
4?
The public information hub, or I didn't know what to call it because it was where we talked about establishing some type of hub for information about the different public safety issues.
Yeah, that's why I had my number 4. I thought you said that was 5. Okay.
Well, I was saying number 5 was the number where we talked about that. Number 5 in your recommendation.
Okay.
Number 5.
The old number 5.
Right, the old number 5.
Okay. Okay. John, does it look like we're going in the right direction? Because we're kind of operating in a void. We're just kind of doing the best we can.
Y'all are amazing. I am so happy to be. I'm just taking notes with you, Councilmember Campbell, and for everyone else. I think you're focusing in exactly the right way. I want to take y'all on the road. More time on this, just what everyone needs.
Yeah, I am very
I think
much
that's great.
Used to a very collaborative process. So even if in the middle of the night you wake up and say, oh, this is something we've forgotten, because we do have, I'm going to be working on a rewrite this weekend. And so by the time we get in our next meeting, which will deal with some other vulnerable populations or listen to presentations of next Thursday, you'll have a rewrite. But then we'll talk about it again to get a rewrite. And then we're supposed to turn in on the 9th. So if in the middle of the night, write your notes, say, oh, we forgot all about this. I didn't think about that. Oh, we need to think about that, because we do need to add as much to this as possible.
And I just want to offer, as you all are writing this, if you have questions or want me to reach out, please you can email me. I spend a lot of time with the West Precinct officers, so I can sort of talk about some of the details, although I think it's great in terms, that you're connecting directly. Problem solving is a big part of what they're trying to do. And I think that the danger of, I think that problem solving emphasis is part of what makes them seen as real police and makes their work so valuable. There's always that danger of them getting sort of set off as a sort of community affairs kind of group. And it's the fact that they're really addressing in partnership with communities and residents and nonprofits. And they should be working in partnership with other parts of Metro to address real public safety concerns. That's what keeps this vital and prevents it from being shunted off to something. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited about the work y'all are doing. And I just want to, I'm a resource and can dig or provide more time sometimes as well.
And I will say this, in our meeting with Mayor Dean, one thing that came out, because we were concerned, at least I shouldn't say we versus me. I was trying to see, we're doing a lot of work and spending a lot of time, and I wanted to make sure this work went toward a purpose. And since they have the committee established that's going through the applicants, I wanted to make sure that this information would feed into that process of determining who will be the standards for the next police chief. Because if we think that the recommendation is community policing, and we want that to be taken seriously, they need to have a question that wraps around that recommendation to ask the applicant that maybe makes it to the finals, what is your position on community policing if it is defined as this? Would this be something that you think would be effective, or have you had an experience with community policing? What about SROs? We want this to lead to a series. I don't know, we don't write the questions, do we, John?
We can actually, well, I think yes. I do think that that the commission gets to write specific questions, and that we get to ask for public written responses to those questions as part of the process.
Okay.
So explicitly, the goal is to get that kind of commitment to the blueprint. And the other part, the other thing that we're hoping to get from the process, and forgive me for mentioning this again, Sharon, is that we also want to bring, we're bringing in really outstanding police executives. So we want to hear their thoughts on the recommendations too. Not only what they've done, but hopefully some feedback. These should be very thoughtful people. And it's our hope that you all, when you get the written recommendations as you move towards the final report, will be able to incorporate some of their feedback. If they have great points, if they've done exciting things, if they have an definition of community policing that's even better than what we come up with, then we have an opportunity as we move towards the final recommendation to say that. So I think that'll be good. We're trying to get some free consulting here in Metro.
Okay, well, does anyone else have anything else they want to discuss or talk about?
I say this really feels good to see it come together, because for a while it was coming apart, not coming apart, it was going every direction. So great job today, all of you. Sharon, thank you especially for your leadership, and Jennifer, everyone. Good meeting.
Yeah, I think
I'd like to reiterate that. Thank you, Sharon, because this outline you gave us really helped kind of narrow it in on what we need to do. So thank you so much for putting this together. It was very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great
like
work.
I said, just let us know if you have any other concerns. So thank you.
Thank you all
Bye.
very much.